Hi guys, and in this video I'm going to basically work on the auth component, and this is basically is the register form, the login form. I'll show you what the forms module is now and basically what that does. And so inside of here, I just want to basically first grab the HTML and CSS that I had for it. So it'll be auth. Hmm. And let me see, let's go here to auth and put that in here. That. And so so basically this is the login form. This is the register form inside of an NG template. Like earlier, I showed you with the ngIf directive. Where is it at here? Let's see. Um, I can't even see this. I'm trying to figure out where it's at. Oh yeah, here it is. ngIf, and so basically already user, which is a variable that will be inside of the auth component, else new user, and basically new user is the name of this ng template, and that just shows the register form, meaning they're a new user and they have to sign up. And right below both of these templates is going to be the loading component, which basically passes in that input of loading data, which will only show if there's any data to actually load. If not, then it won't show anything. And so basically all that's wrapped in a single div. And you can see here, first let me actually take the time to explain each of these forms, like all the different things in the form. So basically similar to like naming the ng template, we want to name the form and we want to name it whatever, you can name it whatever you want. I just did user register, user login. And basically, you can basically, this has to be ng form because that's the type that we're setting this to. And this basically lets Angular know this is a form that you want to basically use certain things on. Then we want to set the method both for posts methods. And then we want to use ng submit, which basically allows you to do a submit without having to do things like e.prevent default, which is what you would do when you submit normally with HTML to prevent the form from submitting before you basically do stuff with it. And so basically you just bind that just like a click event. And so basically ng submit, and then you call the method or you create a method and you use that method to take the value from the name that we named it here. So basically the data that we get for all these fields, it'll be inside of an object literal. And so you want to do dot value to get to basically get the value for that object literal. And basically each name that we named it here, like input, login, email, um, input name, login, password. Basically, that'll be like the value dot and then whatever that was. So dot login email, dot login password to get the value. And so that's how that will work. And so that button here basically is the register button, and that's basically um, well, basically this just switches the forms here. And when you call switch forms, it just toggles already user. And that's what that does. And then basically this is the same here. We have a styling with the header of register, same with login. And then we have a few ng classes here. Um, Another like method here for instead of logging in, we're registering. So we're catching that register. And we have an extra field here for name. And we have placeholders as well, if I didn't say that. And then we basically have a submit button for that. And then this basically switches it to login. So basically what this is it switches between register and login depending on what form is being shown. I think that's why I put that there. This probably doesn't have to even be there. And that's it for this. Oh, and last but not least, the most important thing is two-way data binding, which basically, so we bind data as variables when we use the square brackets. We bind functions or events using the parentheses. So then we combine both of them together with the square brackets always being on the outside. And basically that's called two-way data binding. And you basically want to pass in something called an ng model. And what that's used for is it basically it wants to be the same name as a variable that you would name in your TS file. So basically set the data to it. So then we use dot value dot login email, which is the name here for this input, which the name and the ng model should be the same. Basically you'll get that data. So that's how that works. Um, and so I'll show you that in a second. First, let me grab the CSS as well for the auth component. So let me grab this here. It's a lot of CSS. And let me just grab it and put it in here. Okay. And so basically here we just have the app form container, which contains both forms, margin 0 and auto, so up, down, left, right, width of 25%, height of 30. And then we have the app form, which basically is a border radius 5 pixels, background of white, border of white 1 pixel, so it's thin. Justify content center, align content center. You don't have to use a border as well. Margin bottom of 5 pixels. So for the loading thing, for the loading component, there's a margin between that. Each input has a background of aqua, as well as the color of aqua for the or for the borders, aqua color black for the text. And then you have width of 100%, basically meaning it's 100% inside of that form container here. And then you have margin bottom 10 pixels. And basically, if you don't do width of 100%, it'll put the inputs next to each other, but you can do that. And it'll basically put it below each other. Then you have app form button, which basically cursor pointer as well. Same thing, margin left. And these are like kind of hard coded values because I was in a hurry and so I wanted this to look good. So that's why I did that. And basically, same with the register. And then we have the button login, which basically is the login button. And then we use that same class for the register button as well, but I just left it as login. And then we have app form button hover, which just changes the actual text color to white. And then that's it for this. And so now when I go back here, or let me open up the TS file as well. So the TS file here, we just simply want to import, well, we want to create something called an auth service for our register and our login fetch request to the server, similar to the post service. This will be the only other service for this project. And so basically I want to create it first. Let me go in here and make sure you're in your client folder. ng generate service, or you can do ng generate or nggs for generate services, because that's the folder that we created for all of our services. And then we want to just call this one off, like that. And so once that's done, you can see here we have the off service. And so we can clear, control backtick to close the terminal. And basically, inside of the off service, I just simply want to do that first because that way it'll make sense when I actually put it inside of the off TS file. So let me do off service first. So we want to import the same things. We want to import the HTTP headers and the HTTP client and the HTTP client module. So HTTP client, HTTP headers. Let me also do that. And then let me do from at angular / common / HTTP. We want to import the observable from RxJS. And so basically, we also want to import variables we want, we can put above there. And I'm going to do the HTTP headers again. So I want to do headers and set that to HTTP headers instance like that. And I want to set it equal to a new instantiation of HTTP headers. And it's JSON, so we pass in curly braces, and then we set the content type to application / JSON because we're basically sending JSON in terms of like the input, the object that we stringify inside of our auth TS file that we'll do in a second. And then so that's JSON, and we want to pass that to the backend so it knows what user to pretty much either register or basically return a token and ID for if they're actually a user if they're logging in. And so that'll be it for the variables we want to pass in there. So now it's on to the methods. And so it's just two methods in here: upload, register, user. And so basically this method just it takes in just any, you can name it whatever you want. And remember that it returns an observable. And I set this to the type of any. So basically this is just the one. We actually want to just use any. And we want to do slash API slash off slash register. We're not pending on any parameters, so we actually don't even need to use backticks. I don't know why I did that. Let me just get rid of those backticks really quick. And let me just do single quotes. You can use backticks, it'll work just the same, but I'll do single quotes. And then we want to pass in the data that's already stringified from the auth TS file. And then we want to do the headers, which once again we want to set the object to headers like this, and then the headers that we created. We also want to log user in, which is the login method. And once again, this takes in data and returns an observable of any. And basically, we just want this to return. So this is another one-liner. Host any, because we're returning any. And once again, we want this to be slash API slash off slash login. We want to pass in the data, and then we want to do headers again, and then it'd be just headers. And then that'll be it for this. So now we basically have our off service. So we're just uploading the user, we return any, as well as if we're logging the user in. Same header, content type application JSON for the data that we stringify, that we will stringify in the auth.ts file. And that's it for the service. So now if I go to auth-component.ts, this is where I actually want to import that service that we just created. So basically I'm going to come here and I want to make a few variables first. This will be already user, which remember is what changes the form. Let me see, where is it? Already user right here. So this is what changes the form. It's a boolean, and basically it switches from the login form to the register form. And so that'll be a boolean. And then we want loading data, and that'll be a boolean for when if we want to show the loading component. And now we want references to basically, let me see. So references to the form input fields. So that'll be login email, string, like that, and then we'll do login password, register name, just to separate that for you guys. Put a space there as well. So register name, that's string, register email, which is also a string, and the register password. So basically, the methods obviously will be similar. And so inside of our constructor, that's where we want to pass the service. So off service like that. We can actually import it directly like that, and it all imports it for us. And so now we want to. So inside of our lifecycle method of on init, we just write a comment. This is true by default to show login form first. And so basically, we want to set already user to true to show that form first, because remember it's by default false up here. And loading data we want to set to false by default, but it's already false. But I'm just putting it here just to for it to make more sense. And inside of the on login submit method and on register submit, those two methods are going to be the same. Remember, those are the methods that we basically call once they submit the data. and that basically grabs, it passes in the dot value, and it basically grabs everything from these ng model, the ng model field here that's equal to the name field, which is why we named it the same thing here, because that's the actual variable that the data is going to be in. So inside of here, I want to do on login submit, and I want to do login data, and I want to basically set the data to an object and call the log user in off service method. And so basically I want to do const login const login object is basically an object literal, and it's going to be email login data, because remember that's what we called that variable there, and then dot, and then login email. That shouldn't be like that. Should be a comma. And because remember, this data is basically this value. So if we don't do dot value, we won't be able to do this. So dot value, and then basically the name is basically this name here, which is what we get when we set it equal to this, or this one here, and then we also set the ng model to that to grab the user input. So basically the name, the ng model, and this variable all have to be the same name for it to work. And so now we want to do password. We want to do login data dot login password, like that, which I think, yeah. And so basically we want to just do const login JSON, which is what I call this object, and we want to do JSON.stringify. And you just want to pass in the login object that we just made. You can also pass in the curly braces and do this inside of the JSON stringify. I just did it this way because it makes more sense. And so I can do loading data to true, because now that we've actually got the data, we want to set it to true. You can also do validation here as well if you want to validate to make sure that the fields are actually there, which we should probably do. And basically what we can do, basically what we can do for that is, before we do any of this, we can actually do if login data dot login email, meaning that is there, and then we can do and login data dot login password, and so that just means that we have actual input there. You can do more validation as well, like checking if it's the right size. Well, we do that on the back end anyway. So like basically like you can do that wherever you want to do it at. But we did it on the back end earlier. Let me just go to it. So JS route. You can see we did our validation here for the register and log in. It's just simple validation. It's definitely not the best validation. You want to use reject strings for the email and other things for security, but this is just simple. This is just simple. And so basically, and so if it basically, if the data isn't there, we just don't do anything. And so let me see, where was I at? So we set loading to true. And then we want to actually use the off service log user in method that we created. We want to pass in the data, so log in JSON. Oh, sorry, one second, let me drink some water. not subscribe because remember it returns observable. So basically I'm gonna do response object like that, which is what we get from the back end. Remember that's what we basically get. The response object is the token and the underscore ID for the login route, or for the register route, my bad. And then this one will be the login route, because if the user has any posts, we're sending those back as well. And so basically, inside of the login method, I just want to do emit the ID up to the app component. But this is technically now inside of the home component. And so basically, I want to do ID with post, which I didn't create yet. This is where I want to emit it. And while I'm at it, I may as well create the other output as well. So similar to what we did inside of the navbar component, where we emit something to the component that it's inside of, we want to create some emitters, or basically some component outputs here that are of type event emitter. And so we want to do output like that from Angular core, and we want to do ID to emit and event emitter. Now, if you weren't basically if you didn't watch like the video I said about the event emitter, you want to make sure see that there's another one this time called events. Originally, when I did this, I said earlier basically how it'll auto import it from some other module, and so you'll run into a ton of errors, and you'll try to figure it out because you wouldn't think to look most likely in your import statements because it doesn't show you that. It says something's wrong with certain modules, and you might think that okay, maybe it's an import, but me personally, I didn't do that, and so I spent a whole day trying to figure that out. And so there's one called protractors, which is what mine was in, and you don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure that the event emitter that you import is from Angular core. So we actually can just Control X to get rid of that entire line. And basically, I want to put this inside of oops, I want to do event emitter like that. That's the event emitter that we want. So make sure that you do that one. I'm trying to do that to save somebody a ton of trouble from having to figure that out because it was terrible. So event emitter, and then a new instance of it, and then we want to do the same thing for the register method, and I just called this ID, or the login method, and I just called this ID with post. You can name these whatever you want, and then event emitter of type any again is equal to new event emitter like that. And so down here, back in the on login submit method, we want to basically emit the ID with post. So back down in here, we want to emit ID with post. We want to dot emit, and we want to emit that response object that we get back from the backend. That's going to allow us to switch from the actual auth component with the two forms of login and register to the actual post grid, meaning that the user is registered. And now I want to do loading data, and I want to just set that to false, which will basically take the loading component back off of the screen just for extra UI effect. And so we can put a semicolon there as well. And we're done with the actual login method, and now we want to do the same thing for the most part for the on register submit method. So we can do on register submit, register data, and I want to set the data to an object. I actually didn't put that comment there. I'm gonna put it in there for the login method too. To an object and call the upload register user off service method. And I just want to do this here for you guys in the login method as well. Login function, also a method, and basically log user in like that. So basically here I want to do const register object. Oops. I want to do name register data dot register name. Same for the email. Create a JSON object from that data. So we do register JSON is equal to JSON.stringify, and then basically that object. So register object. Then I want to do set the loading boolean to true again. Then I want to do off service dot and then upload register user. Then we want to pass in that register JSON object that we stringified. And then we actually want to use dot subscribe because it returns on whatever we want it to return, and I'll call it res object again, response object. Inside of this callback here, I simply want to emit the ID up to the home component again. So I'm going to use ID to emit because this is the one without posts because they just registered, so they shouldn't have any posts. And it should be res object like that. And then we also want to set loading data to false. Then that's it for that. We also want to do the switch forms method, which I didn't do. So switch forms, and basically that just toggles. So toggles the form switch boolean to switch the login and register forms via user click. There we go. And basically it'll be already user, and it'll just simply be equal to not already user like that. So it just toggles it to whatever the opposite of it is. So it says it equals to the opposite. And then that's it for the auth component. So now you can see hopefully a little bit of how everything works.